Hi, it's Robert Mendelson, Fractional CMO here in beautiful Montreal, welcoming you to another episode of the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. We're part of Fractional Pros Canada, the home for Canada's fractional community, and you can find us on Facebook. We bring you conversations about everything fractional that matters for fractional executives and businesses from coast to coast. Think of this as your go-to spot for real talk, practical wisdom, and strategies you can actually use, all without the corporate fluff and with plenty of Canadian content. Whether you're a fractional pro or a business in our great country of Canada and beyond, this conversation is for you. Grab your espresso and let's dive in. Welcome to the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. I'm your host and fractional CMO, Robert Mendelson. Today's Fractional Pros Canada podcast is powered by Fractional Pros Canada, the only Canadian online community for Canada's fractional executives. Join us on our Facebook group. Just search for Fractional Pros Canada on Facebook. And joining me today is Leah Diteljan, founder of Mind Spa Movement. With extensive experience working with executives and leadership teams, Leah helps leaders break through emotional barriers and overcome the psychological stuckness that prevents effective decision-making. Leah, welcome to the Pros Pod.
Thanks, Robert. It's so nice to be here.
So, Leah, I want to talk to you about this topic because everybody gets stuck. Everybody makes the wrong decision, even when they know it's the wrong decision. And I'm guilty of doing that in both my personal life, my professional life. I think everybody has, whether they realize it or not, or admit it or not. And I'd love to explore with you today why we do this to ourselves, why we are, hashtag stupid humans to that degree, and what we can do about changing it. And as fractional executives, learn how to manage clients like, a CEO who might be afraid to do the right thing, even when they know what the right thing is to do. So, Leah, let's start out with how many leaders achieve tremendous external success, but still internally they're a mess. They're facing tremendous internal barriers, regardless of their external success. What are the most common forms of psychological stuckness that you see in high-performing business leaders?
I love the context that you offer here, Robert. And I think something that, to simplify it, is leaders spend more time thinking than feeling. And that's where the stuckness comes from, is we are continually over-rationalizing our decisions to a point where we are so stuck because we've looked at it from every angle that we actually haven't tuned in to our body and to our heart to ask, what is the right decision for me? And ultimately, that heart-mind alignment is really what helps make decisions happen faster because we can feel the rightness within ourselves.
That's deep. Need to absorb that. But that's great. That makes so much sense. So what's the relationship between these limiting mental patterns that we all have and the physical sensations in our bodies? I know myself, sometimes I feel something is off, but I'm not quite sure what. So how does all that connect together to contribute to our stuckness?
So I think that when we feel something is off, we need to trust that instead of overriding it. Because if we override it because it doesn't make sense in the moment, then we're sending a message to our heart that I don't trust you. And if we're sending messages that we don't trust ourselves, then we're constantly going to be in this cyclical pattern of fear of making the wrong decision, which is when we end up staying in a stuck position for longer or more frequently.
So trusting ourselves is not easy for a lot of us, I think present company included, because there's constantly, what I call the monkey voice, constantly going in the back of my head, questioning everything, that lack of confidence, the good old imposter syndrome. I've got I've got a picture of Robbie, right?
Oh
Me
my
at, how
gosh.
old am I there? I don't know, 5 or something. And that's my inner child, right? And every morning now I say good morning to myself, and I look at this picture and I'm like, I don't recognize the person in the picture, but I know that they're somewhere inside me to this day. And I try to treat that person inside me with a little extra care and reassurance every day that, hey, I'm here, I got you, and thank you for making me question everything and trying to keep us safe. But I'm the adult here now, and we're together in this, and I'm walking you home, so to speak. We're walking home
Mm-hmm.
together, and we're doing this together, and everything's going to be okay. And I try to have that kind of reassuring conversation every morning and several times throughout the day. Is that a technique that is good? Do you have any comments on that? Am I crazy?
First of all, this is so precious and unexpected. So thank you for introducing me to little Robbie. And I think it's beautiful because inner child work is an aspect of ourself. And regardless of how we were raised, it doesn't matter the environment or how well our parents did or didn't do, we're going to have that in us. And so by you aligning and saying, I hear you, I'm here to protect you, but I've got it from here because I'm the adult, you're forming a relationship that's building more trust with another aspect of yourself, which is so important. So kudos to you. It's not only adorable and endearing, it's super grounding.
All right, and most importantly, sounds like I'm not crazy. At
Yes, you're
least,
not. I mean, we're all crazy, right? Who wants to be
yeah,
normal anyways? What is normal?
right, right.
Yeah.
Nobody knows. Okay. So you talk about in your work something called emotional cardio. So I've never seen any gyms out there offering emotional cardio. So tell us about what is this emotional cardio? Are there kind of emotional cardio workouts that you do? How does this work?
Absolutely. So I call it emotional cardio so that it's a little bit relatable because having emotional tenacity is a type of fitness. Being able to lean into fear and get comfortable being uncomfortable and not being afraid to lean into the emotions that are uncomfortable, even having like productive anger, productive frustration, knowing how to use these, that is a type of emotional cardio. And how I do it, I practice emotional cardio every day, whether it's journaling or actually setting aside space in my calendar to be like, I felt frustrated when I woke up today. I have 3 calls right away, so I can't focus on it then. But after my yoga class, I'm going to focus on what that frustration meant and follow that because I need to trust it. And so I actually take my emotions that seriously. Like, what was I feeling? Why was that coming up? Because a quick definition that I love is our emotions are indicators of whether or not our beliefs align with our desires. And so when we have seemingly negative ones, it's because our beliefs are not aligning with our desires. And that's probably some type of fear that's in the way. So when I allocate time to work on cardio, which stretches my capacity to be in the discomfort for longer, just like training for a marathon or something, you can't just suddenly run 25, 40K. You've got to do it in increments. It's the same with emotional cardio.
So I like that part about when your beliefs don't align with your desires. I think in myself, it kind of manifests probably different words, but same idea, which is I realize that when I'm in a situation, whether it's talking with somebody, thinking about something, trying to make a decision on something, and I feel something is not right within me, that somewhere ultimately it's due to a conflict of values. I have my own values, and I probably couldn't really name them as well as what they actually are because they're so deeply ingrained in me. I could give it a shot, but I feel something sometimes that tells me if this feels right or not. And what I've learned is over the last few years to listen to that more and more because I really believe that everybody knows the answers already. And when we go and ask other people for what do you think, we often already know what we think. We're just looking for validation of what we think. And so I've kind of learned that regardless of what other people tell me, at the end of the day, I'm going to feel something and I need to pay more attention to that something. And it's either a positive feeling or not a good feeling. And that's kind of the compass I've been using more and more. And so far it seems to be working pretty well.
I imagine it has, and that's so wonderful to hear that because it we can trust ourselves more when we trust what we're feeling instead of pushing it down. And I think the other point that you make that is so important is knowing what our values are. And okay, if we can't articulate it out loud in the moment, if an emotion comes up, it's a great reminder to go look at what our values are and is this a time when we actually need to refine it or just ground in them again as a reminder.
So yeah, and I remember doing an exercise quite a few years ago. The first time I came across it, somebody said, "What are your values?" and it made me stop. I was like, I never thought about that, and it took quite a long time to write out that list, and it gets changed over time. And like I said, I think it's really tough to really identify them in words. I think I do my best, but there's it's a moving target. And they change over time as well, right? They're not a static thing. But I think it comes back to being present in the moment and really stopping. And when at least for me, when I feel something isn't right, kind of like stop and take stock of what is it that's causing the sensation. And then I try to relate it back to what are the values that this is not aligning with, and then try to figure out if all that makes sense, and then kind of figure out next steps from there, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. It fully makes sense. And I think the other part, even going back to the beginning of what the conversation of making a wrong decision and that fear of a wrong decision, we actually can't make the wrong decision, but we can make decisions that are not in alignment with our values. So that's why it feels wrong or seems wrong, would be more accurate language. Just like if somebody acts in a way that hurts us or feels negative towards us, they're actually not necessarily doing anything wrong. It's just probably not in alignment with our values.
I'm going to push back on you can't make a wrong decision, because I think a lot of people listening are probably thinking that. What do you mean you can't make a wrong decision? I've made a lot of wrong decisions in my life. They were clearly wrong. And there's a billion examples. So when you say you can't make a wrong decision, what do you mean by that?
Well, maybe it's the language that we can play with a little bit. I actually don't believe that I can make a wrong decision because every time I make a decision, it's something that I have a lot to learn from. And that's the reason that I made that decision that maybe wasn't the most direct path. And there could have been a stronger, better decision for me. But it really is about saying, if I'm holding it in and saying this was the wrong decision, there's a real critical lens that happens there, which also creates more stuckness. And so if I actually have more compassion towards myself and saying, wow, okay, I could have made a different decision, but then I wouldn't have learned X. And that helps me shift it so that I don't start to get hard on myself.
So I like that. It's not necessarily a wrong decision. It's a different decision. And I could have made a different decision. Things would have gone in a different direction. I always like to, I always say fail fast, right? If you're going to make the wrong decision, and that's everybody does, it's okay. Just, correct it, so to speak, as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And most importantly, learn from it. Often, I think we learn more from wrong decisions than right decisions in many cases.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree.
All right. Psychological barriers. Let's talk about psychological barriers that prevent business leaders, and we could certainly say everybody in general in their personal life. Let's talk in the business context. Psychological barriers that prevent business leaders from having those necessary difficult conversations with either their colleagues, people who are reporting to them, people within their business, what causes, where are those psychological barriers typically coming from as far as you've seen, and how do you break those down?
Sure. I think a common one is projection. So, projection is when your subconscious mind is not recognizing that somebody is reminding you of somebody from your past, and it's the exact same context or scenario playing out with just a new person. And I think that's a huge stuck point because the other person actually is just showing up as a mirror to something that we need to learn. And it's hard not to want to create disconnection, space, or blame because of the actions that they're presenting to us. So we start projecting our past circumstance onto them in order to protect ourselves.
Yeah, it's almost like we get triggered and something that's happened in the past gets imprinted on the person in front of us or that we're talking with without us even realizing it. And then all of a sudden we're not having a conversation with the person in front of us. We're having a conversation with that other person that we've now, projected onto that person in front of us. And it just, well, it just goes sideways pretty fast usually, right?
Yes, exactly.
So what do we do to stop that, to be aware of that? I guess the first part is to be aware that that's happening, and then once you're aware of that, what do you do to kind of come back to the present? And of course, all this happens within milliseconds because you're having a conversation with somebody who's right in front of you in your office, let's say. You don't have time to like stop and evaluate, and like this all has to happen really fast on the fly. So what's the magic trick? What's the magic bullet there?
So, of course, you can't stop in real time. You can actually ask for a pause in the conversation, though. And I think a lot of people are afraid of asking for that because it's very atypical and it's very brave to say, hold on a second, I'm just recognizing something's uncomfortable. Can I just have a second to just check in with myself? That doesn't happen very often, but we all wish we would have done that in the time at the time. So just giving ourselves permission to actually take space in the moment when we're not sure what's happening is a beautiful gift. I think the other thing is actually ensuring that we create space after the fact in some time, like some recency later in that day to actually process what happened because we are also pretty obsessed with being more self-aware and with self-development right now. And we're just taking in more information and stacking these things on top of each other. So we actually need to create space to reflect on them, to create stronger self-awareness. And so if that means journaling by yourself, having a conversation with somebody, maybe you have a coach, psychologist, therapist, mentor, whatever it is, but actually creating space to process it is what's going to shift that awareness in a future conversation.
I'm having trouble envisioning a conversation between a business leader and somebody else. There's a negotiation going on for something, and right in the middle of the conversation, one of the executives says, "Hang on just a minute. I need to check in with myself." I'm having trouble picturing that in most scenarios. Most people are not going to do that.
Of course, because it's extremely brave. The slowing down the cadence and the money and the deal is at the forefront of the emotional block there. If you actually slow it down, it could actually build a stronger relationship, not only with yourself, but the people in the room, because they're going to feel the sincerity of that moment.
Yeah, and I guess it all comes down to the old what's become a little cliche now is being vulnerable, right? That's really showing vulnerability to actually ask for that pause in the middle of the conversation to say something like, "I want to check in with myself," or "I need to check in with myself." So
Yeah.
that's something we don't see every day, and some people aren't comfortable with being vulnerable. It's just not in the cards. It's just not something on the menu.
Well, and I imagine those people are very stuck because it would be
So they go
very
together.
hard to wear masks all the time.
Go
Yeah,
together. Lack of vulnerability equals a higher chance of stuckness.
absolutely. Yeah.
So let's talk about another term that we hear a lot more and more lately, radical self-awareness. So explain, first of all, what is radical self-awareness?
I think the reason why this is an effective term right now is because there's such a jarring harshness to radical. It just sounds really defiant and out there and taking a sharp left. And self awareness is more soft and expansive and graceful. We've got almost like the masculine feminine thing going on with these two words. And I think why it's really popular right now is self awareness is vulnerable. Being so self aware and actually matching language to what we're observing in ourselves and saying out loud to somebody actually draws somebody in. And it's actually creating more connection, not only to ourselves, but to other people. And so it's radical because Apple created a home button on our phone, and we're becoming more connected and comfortable with that than we are in actually sharing our self awareness with another human being. And so that's why it's radical. It's very vulnerable.
So it's almost like suggesting we need our own home button on our forehead, let's say, where we could just press it and automatically reconnect with ourselves.
Yeah, or our heart or wherever. Exactly. But it's radical self-awareness is reconnection, I think.
That's an interesting point. And you said head or heart. Which one is it? Is it the head? Is it the heart? Is it both? If we had that magical home button on us, where would it be?
I'd say heart. Yeah. Yeah, I'd
Heart
say.
overrules head.
I don't think it overrules it. I think we need to integrate both of them. We need our rational mind and we need our feelings and our heart. And this all goes back to the original definition of psychology was actually study of the soul. And then it shifted to study of the mind. So we really, really emphasize the rational mind more than the emotional heart.
Walk us through what what you've seen from experience. What happens psychologically when a business leader hires an expert like a fractional executive, and we do our job, we analyze, we strategize, we propose solutions, and at the end of the day, the executives, our clients, resist taking that advice. And to be fair, nobody knows their business like our clients, and they may have good reasons based on data where they push back and say, well, what you're proposing doesn't make sense. But in many cases, the data does support what we're proposing to do, and we do know enough about their business to make the right proposal, give the right advice. Yet the executives, the client is still going to resist taking our advice. What's going on there psychologically when we see that happen?
I mean, there's probably more details circumstantially that we could use here, but my immediate inference is a fear of losing control. So often business owners' identity is wrapped up in the business that they've created, especially if they're a ground up entrepreneur. And as much as they know that they need help to scale, that's why they've hired a fractional person, there's still a fear of losing control. And that fear is what's holding them back from actually having more of a conversation about that too. So I think the friction that happens is it's not necessarily a trust thing, but it's actually trusting to have the conversation that's not happening at the table, which is, I'm afraid of this type of growth, or am I able to do this? Can I afford this? Am I the right person to lead the company at this stage based on what they're suggesting? I think there might be a lot of fear there. And having a conversation about what their leadership needs to look like to implement some of these suggestions is often not the conversation that happens.
So what's a good way to address that? So we've presented, the clients come back, said, thanks for all the hard work. We're going to go in a different direction. Is that the point where we say, obviously we're going to say, well, okay, but why, right? In different words, but basically ask why. Mm-hmm. And they're not going to tell us They're never going to say, well, because I'm afraid of losing control. No one's going to say that. But what's an effective way to try to open that conversation and help the client, if possible, get to realizing that the only thing holding them back from going in the right direction is that fear of losing control.
So I think if it's something that comes up in the moment when a client says we want to go a different direction, then it's probably too fragile to bring it up in the moment because it would sound so confrontational and accusatory, and it's probably not going to create the outcome that you're looking for. However, if it's actually put in the processes when taking on a new client at the beginning, saying that there are check-in points that we need to have conversations about communication and understanding more about the human aspects of these changes that we're suggesting. And at the end, we've had this with clients before where they actually decide that they don't want to go the direction that we want to go. We actually have a separate conversation for transparency to understand that because it's a learning for all of us. And I think how that helps is it's proactively putting in points where you have permission to ask why that don't come as a surprise so they're not going to get defensive. But this takes more time. It takes more intentionality. It takes more courage. And that's why it's not generally built in. But it helps because it doesn't come as a surprise. So people don't feel they need to protect themselves.
I love that. It's almost like making sure that you build into your strategic plan and planning checkpoints for communication,
Yeah.
which is not something that we typically think of in our strategy. It's more about delivering, solutions oriented, and we kind of just take it for granted that there's going to be communication. We're going to talk to each other. We're going to exchange emails. We're going to get on Zoom calls. That's the communication. But this is an extra layer to think about, kind of building the process that would enable us to open that door should we need it more naturally.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's just going to
Nice.
deepen the relationship you have professionally by a lot too.
Nice. I'll have to start incorporating that into my strategies. Many of us create limiting stories about ourselves, right? The stories we tell ourselves, and this kind of relates to some of the things we've already talked about, just under a different label, right? Stories. What's your experience been with helping leaders, executives, identify what are those limiting stories we're telling ourselves, and how do you change that story that's going through your head? How do you stop that tape and change it to something more positive?
Sure. I'd love to offer an example here.
Right.
So I was working with a client and he was a very quiet person, very like big masculine guy, but he was very quiet. We often had to ask, so what do you think in conversations? And then he would offer his opinion, and it was always phenomenal. And so I had a one-on-one conversation with him, and I asked the question, what were conversations like at your dinner table growing up? And he said, oh, we actually had foster children. We had at least two foster children at a time in my family growing up. And I said, okay, so what were conversations like having those two foster kids there? And he said, well, because of the often jarring life and circumstances that they've already lived through, I gave the microphone to them at the table and I was very quiet. And you just saw him like, wow, this is it. This is why I'm quiet because I'm so used to giving the table to other people to speak. I taught myself to do that, to be a caring person. And I said, okay, and so what's happening when you're quiet? Are you listening to what they're saying? Are you listening for what you're thinking? What's that quiet affording you? And he goes, I'm freaking out because I don't know what to say. And I said, okay. So your silence is not silent for you, but it's silence for people that are receiving you. So how do we encourage you to know that your voice at the table is as important? It doesn't matter what the past circumstances are. We can have grace and empathy, but we need to hear your voice too. huge light bulb. And so, to answer your question more directly, oftentimes all the time these stories come from a part of our past that we haven't considered. So, getting to know ourselves more deeply and intimately, this is also emotional cardio, helps us understand why we're showing up the way that we are. And it's often embedded in our subconscious, so it's not easy to excavate that gold. But just by starting with curiosity, we can get there.
It's kind of like going back and having a conversation with this guy.
Yeah, little Robbie.
Have him share some, reminisce a little bit. What was it like growing up? What was it like around the dinner table? And absolutely, I can totally relate to that story in many ways. We talked about introverts. Let's talk about introverts versus extroverts. And I mean, I love asking the question, is one better than the other? I think I already know the answer, but what's your take on it? What are the strengths and weaknesses? If we do a quick SWOT analysis of introvert versus extrovert, what does that look like from your perspective?
Okay. So, there's the classic definition of an introvert recharges by being alone and an extrovert recharges by being social, right? And I think everybody has elements of both. It's totally dependent on the connection, the circumstance, where they are. And I think I like to kind of overlay this definition with how I use courage and bravery. So I think courage is very internal, so we could call that introverted energy, and bravery is very external. Courage is looking inwards and building more self-awareness and understanding ourselves and having that alone time to really reflect and see what we need. Bravery is acting on that courage and using extroverted energy to actually go out and make whatever you need to happen. And so I think we need both. We just need to understand the necessity of both and how they show up in ourselves individually. So I used to be full extrovert. I used to really not enjoy alone time at all. My mom was actually concerned about me not enjoying time alone. And now I love it and I thrive on alone time. And it shifted because I used to care more about what other people thought than what I cared about myself. And so it really does come down to the state and the place you are in your life, in the relationship you have with yourself as well. Are you willing to give up that time with yourself to invite more energy from other people? Or are you in more of a healing place and you really need to kind of look inside and recharge and you need more of that time? So it depends.
That's really interesting. So you went from being an extrovert to realizing that it was healthier for you to be introvert. Are there cases of the opposite as well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I consider myself an ambivert now. Like I can be extremely social, I can be extremely introverted. Yeah. Just kind of depends on what I need.
Yeah, and I think I remember reading some kind of study a few years ago saying that in actuality, the vast majority of people are not one or the other, but a mix of both, right?
Yeah.
Is that what your experience
Well,
is?
and society loves to pick one or the other and be very black and white,
We
right?
love labels,
So we do. We do.
right? How can leaders shift from blaming external factors, so shift from that to embracing what I think you call extreme ownership and getting to a mindset where anything is possible?
There is such liberating and empowering energy in taking responsibility for a circumstance that is often really hard to do. And when someone has done something that really hurts us, that is really taking a long time to get through, get over, get past, the hardest part is usually forgiving ourselves for the part that we played in that. And when we can get to that point, that's when the extreme self-responsibility comes in. And that's radical self-awareness, where we can actually create the space to say, wow, I really see how I made a mess of that or how I exacerbated that situation. And now that I see that, I know that I'm not going to do that again because I have extrapolated that wisdom from that circumstance and alchemized the emotions around it so I can carry forward. And that's extremely liberating because we're just storing that lesson and we're carrying on. And it takes a lot of work on yourself and awareness to be able to do that. But it's exciting when we're able to do that.
Wow, that's interesting. So taking responsibility for the circumstances, and I guess that's typically a negative circumstance because everybody's very happy to take responsibility for a positive circumstance. So we're talking about
Yep.
something bad, right?
Yep. Yep. Something we're not proud of, something that we handled poorly, right? But I think once we get used to sharing or confessing these aspects that we're not proud of, then we're not hiding them and it becomes easier. Like on my
So
team calls, we actually have, everybody does the positive, professional and personal updates, 2 minutes or whatever. We also have confessional in there. How did we,
confessional,
how did we
okay?
mess up? How did you mess up this week? What did you learn about yourself? And it's just awesome to lead with that.
That's great. I've heard that called post-mortem. I don't think I've ever heard it called confessional. I love I love it. It gives it that that religious connotation.
Yeah.
But I love that confessional. That's great. You also talk about something else I've never heard of this term, unshakable presence. Tell us about what is unshakable presence.
Unshakable presence is being so grounded and calm and here with someone that they feel so seen that they just recognize subliminally that they don't need to hide. And when it's unshakable, it's because the distractions just kind of melt away because this is the only place I want to be. Like right now, here with you. I have set up myself so that I can be completely 100% focused to learn more about you and to be in this conversation. And, it's spring break for the kids downstairs, but I'm here.
Thank you. Um, no, I get it. That's great, and it's super hard to be, I guess, unshakably present these days, especially with all the distractions. Our phones dinging at us all the time, and the notifications popping up, and then, of course, the voice inside the head, all these things screaming at us, like, "Oh, I got to do this. Can't forget to do that." There's a million things. It's not easy to be unshakably unshakably present. You seem to be really good at it. What's top one or two tips to help us be unshakably present?
To understand our emotions, because when I understand them, I can observe them. I don't attach to them. They don't consume me, so I can be right here. Yeah.
Just understand your emotion. You said that, and I wanted to sarcastically yell out, "Oh, well, that's easy." That's of course.
I literally spend at least an hour on myself a day. And that's outside of fitness.
So tell us about that routine. 1 hour a day. What are you doing in that 1 hour?
All right, you ready to, is there broom parking for this phone call? So one way that I've increased my discernment and trust in myself radically in the last month is I've actually been tracking my dreams, and then I've been using ChatGPT to interpret them with me. And the reason that I've been so intentional with this, like literally I'll stay up and I'll write down if a bear was chasing me, which happened 2 nights ago. And then in the morning I'll interpret it. And the reason why this is so important is because that's actually our subconscious mind marrying our conscious mind. And so there isn't a separation between my waking state and my sleeping state. And so this is kind of the work I've been doing. And I don't need to go any deeper than that. But the symbols and the metaphors that show up in our dreams are actually showing us what we need to focus on in our waking state.
Wow. Okay. Dreams and AI, a whole new use for AI that I've not explored, using AI to interpret
Yeah.
dreams. I love that. Making a note here. What else are you doing in that daily routine?
So if I feel a little bit off, what I often do in the morning when I wake up is I'll write down all the ways that my life feels very abundant, all the actual physical things that have come into my life that are signs of abundance. And I think that's important because it's different than gratitude, but you can use that as gratitude if you want. And then at night, I'll write down 10 things that showed me how I committed to myself that day. And then I do that for a 10-day period in a row to get myself back on track, is to bookend like how I want to show up, what I'm looking for, and how I've committed to myself. And each day they have to be 10 different things.
What does that mean? Committed to myself. Give me an example of what.
So, I went to yoga today. I woke up and I did my abundance list first thing. I ate healthy all day long. I had that hard conversation with my teammate that I'd been putting off. I called my sister-in-law and told her that I loved her because it had been 2 weeks since I had a phone conversation with her. Like it's things like this that I put into that list that help me ground in being proud of myself.
Interesting. I thought you were going to list out things, and you started off with some things that fell under the category of self-care.
Yeah.
But, and I guess in a way they are, but, calling sister-in-law to say I love you to me is not self-care, but I guess on some level it is, but it's kind of indirect self-care. It's, in other words, it's not something you're doing to yourself, something you're doing with that involves somebody else to somebody else, but at the end of the day, it's actually making you feel better, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think self-care probably gets a reputation for like meditation and bubble baths, which there's a place for that, and we need that too. Oftentimes, we do feel good when we do something brave, which is self-care as well.
Meditation, bubble baths, and eating a really big piece of not good for you chocolate cake.
You know what? We need those days too.
So you mentioned meditation. Let's talk a little bit about that. Mindfulness practices. I imagine those are good. It's a good way. One of the tools in the toolkit to overcome that stuckness. Is that is that
Yes.
correct from what you've seen in experience?
Yes, absolutely. So just to give a quick example of how potent I've come to understand meditation, and not to say that you need to do it at this level, but I recently did a 10-day silent meditation retreat where I was meditating for 15 hours a day. Again, that's a lot.
Yes.
But to dial it back a little bit so it's more digestible. The simplicity that I learned from meditation is that it is a practice of observing and not attaching. And so pick the circumstance, pick the corner, pick the essential oil, whatever you want to do. You don't have to do anything or walk away with it from anything. All it is observing your thoughts and feelings and sensations and not attaching to them. And how does this come into like leadership? I felt it at the most like human physical level, where as leaders, we're constantly solving things. We're constantly trying to find other how to's. We're constantly trying to avoid failure. We're just constantly going back between, I want more of this, I want less of this. How do I avoid this? How do I get more of this? And what meditation does is instead of attaching and thinking we have to do something and act on it, we actually get to observe it and then actually create space and then make a decision on what's best. So we don't always need to go full throttle, foot on the gas all the time. And that really helped me get calmer and trust my decisions more and actually slow them down.
And you've managed to integrate this not just when you're actually doing, in dedicated time for mindfulness or meditation, but in your everyday life as you're going about your life, you're in a difficult conversation and you're able to like on the spot, kind of catch yourself and say, don't react to that. Just observe that question or that accusation or whatever was just thrown at you that is not necessarily something good that would otherwise trigger you emotionally. You're able to just say, I'm just watching it, not reacting.
Yeah. And like we said earlier in the conversation, I have a habit of saying, I'm actually not sure if I can make a decision on this. Can you just give me a second while I think about it? And I realize this is awkward, but just give me a second. And I just address that that is awkward silence and that's atypical, but it helps. Yeah.
Do you have any experience working with not just Canadians, but Americans or other people who are not Canadian? And I'm wondering if there's, everybody, not everybody, there's kind of a stereotype of the typical Canadian, right? We're over apologetic, we're a little bit more conservative, etc. Do you have any observations on that as far as do we as Canadians have more kind of built-in, I don't know, limitations in our minds? Maybe we're more prone to be stuck on certain things just because of the fact that we're Canadians?
So I guess our reputation of being nice. I've lived in Australia, I've traveled around the world, I've done retreats with, people representing 10, 12 countries at any given time. Europeans are a lot more direct, Aussies are more direct, Americans are more direct than we are. And in recognizing that, I realized that our niceness might actually be disguised as passive aggressiveness.
Oh,
And it's something I've worked on because I think we do a good job of apologizing for the space that we're taking, which comes across as polite, but it's actually deflecting the need that we really have. And so I think as Canadians, we need to get better at identifying our needs first, being confident that our needs deserve to be fulfilled just as much as anybody else's, whether it's one Canadian to another or one Canadian to an American. And when we get really grounded in what our need is and we ask for it to be fulfilled, we also need to be okay that we might get disappointed. But we need to stop putting other people's needs first and always apologizing for the space that we're taking because it's not helpful. It's confusing in other cultures.
that's a great perspective. And, the accusation and observation that Canadians are in general passive aggressive is one I've never heard. And I'm not comfortable with that. I don't want to be passive aggressive. That's bad, right? But in the context of the way you said it, I think it's very helpful as an observation. And I think also that what's happening in the last few months as a result of the friction from our neighbors south of the border is kind of forcing us in a way to overcome that and claim our space more, right? So in a way, it's kind of like a therapeutic positive coming out of the negative.
Exactly. We're recovering people pleasers as a nation.
We're recovering people pleasers. Canada, you are a nation of recovering people pleasers. If I put that on a mug, I'm not sure how many we're gonna sell.
And we'll see who gives you a thumbs up.
Any other tips you can give for simple daily practices that can help fractional executives, any executive, probably any human being to achieve all the different things we've talked about? I guess sum it up as emotional awareness, for
Sure.
lack of a better term, when working with clients, when interacting with other people.
Yep.
A few more tips.
Sure. So, say you're going into a conversation as a fractional with your client. I love to write down, how do I want to feel at the end of this conversation? What is the thing that is hardest for me to say? How can I say that early? And how important is it for me to say this? What does that do for the relationship? I always think of the relationship versus the contract or the agreement. And those things just help me keep me really anchored in how I'm going to say whatever I need to say. so that connection's at the forefront of it. And people can really feel our intentions. So if relationship is at the forefront of it, people are going to feel that and they're going to generally come towards us. If it comes across that it's more about the contract and the money, people are going to feel that. And when people start to question our intentions, there's a natural separation that happens, and that's when conversations get really off track. So, what do you want to feel at the end of this? What's the hardest thing to say? How can you say that with the relationship at the forefront?
So I also heard you say, is this important to say? And does that mean that you may filter some things and maybe one of those hard questions you're not going to ask because it's not important enough for the conversation?
Yes, totally agree. So that goes back to sort of the courage versus bravery thing again, is having the self-awareness, spending the time, like, what do I want to say versus what is the best to say for this relationship? And if you kind of question that and you're not sure and you don't have that clarity, what I also do is I take out my phone and I record myself saying it. And then I look back at it and I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not going to say that to somebody else, but I needed to see myself say that. And so now that's done.
Kind of like a mirror exercise with instant feedback from yourself.
Exactly. That's radical self-awareness.
That's really interesting. But somewhere there's a conflict between kind of filtering what you're going to say and being, completely authentic, completely vulnerable. How do you reconcile that?
So I think authenticity is a little bit misunderstood because Hitler was very authentic. I think people can feel when we're genuine and when we're sincere. And so we can still be very sincere and mean everything we say. We just don't have to be so transparent that they have everything. And that's kindness.
I'm pausing to absorb that again. Deep thoughts. All right, let's wrap this up, Leah. My final question for you today is, if you could put anything on a billboard that fractional executives and business leaders would see every day, what would that billboard say?
Wake up knowing you love yourself and you belong.
Wake up knowing you love yourself and you belong. Okay.
Yeah.
Mine, I mean, I have a lot, but I think in the context of this conversation, I think mine would be one of my favorites is, the bad news is that you're in free fall. The good news is there's no bottom.
That's awesome. I haven't heard that before.
Leah, thank you so much for sharing your time with us and your wisdom, knowledge, and experiences. Really, really appreciate it. Where can people find you?
Well, thank you. I've really enjoyed this conversation. And I loved the pause that you took earlier, by the way. I don't know if you noticed yourself doing that. You can find me on LinkedIn. My last name's the hardest part about finding me, but I'm the only one in the world. Leah Diteljan, Diteljan. You can find me on LinkedIn, or my website is www.mindspamovement.com.
And let's go back to that. What pause did I take that I didn't notice?
Before you asked the final question about the billboard, you said, oh, that's a deep thought. Hold on. I'm just going to think about that for a second. And you did.
Okay. Yep. All right, Leah. Thank you so much. This was awesome.
Thank you. It sure was. Thanks, Robert.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. If you're a fractional professional based in Canada, we'd love to have you join us in the Fractional Pros Canada Facebook group, the home for Canada's fractional community. It's where Canadian fractional executives connect, share insights, and help each other succeed. Until next time, I'm Robert Mendelson, Fractional CMO. May your impact be full-time, even if your hours are fractional.